everybody, it's Grace Fangirl Shiny. Hope you guys are having an amazing day, and we are here with a review, which we haven't done for a while, and we are here with the review for Wicked. Just to give a little bit of context, I absolutely love Wicked. I've grown up with it. I was very young when it first came to Australia, and then obviously, like, it's come back multiple years here in Australia because it's so popular and stayed for so long. I will go into more of my love for Wicked a little bit later, especially when talking about Elphaba. But yeah, just know that Wicked is one of my favorite musicals, and every time it comes to Australia, I go and see it because it's just so good. Now, obviously, with this film, there was heavy expectation, but also, like, it's interesting to see this from word of mouth. People are going to see this film who don't usually watch musicals, which is very interesting and very, very cool to see, especially in this time when Hollywood, for a long period of time, especially when something like Greatest Showman came out, believed that audiences didn't want to see musicals, when in reality, I think they do, but just well done musical movies. We are going to get into the brilliance of this film because, as you can see, I was very pleased by this. I went and watched it twice, so I'm very excited to get into this. Just a heads up, I'm not going to go into heavy spoilers, especially with things to do with part 2, but I will hint towards it. But if you want nothing to do with that, if you don't want to know, especially if you're new to the Wicked fandom, I will put timestamps especially for that, so please keep an eye out for that and try to avoid it as best as possible. I really don't want to ruin the experience for anybody. And also, I won't go into every single song. I've just chosen the songs that I've found very important to discuss in terms of the characters in the film, so please don't hate me for that. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and yeah, let's get straight into reviewing Wicked. So Wicked, also known as Wicked Part 1, is directed by Jon Chu, who has done a couple of films in musicals, step-up movies. He's done Crazy Rich Asians, which also has a lot of music orientation to it, and also has done In the Heights, which is a musical but was made into a film as well recently. I think it was in 2021. I can't speak on how good it is because I haven't watched it and I don't know the music, but from what I've seen in reviews and commentaries, people have said it's a very well-made musical film. So already from that, you can tell that Jon Chu obviously has an expertise in musicals and bringing them to the movie sphere, and he was perfect choice actually as a director. He did a fantastic job, I personally think so, and you can tell, especially how he talks about it in interviews, how much love he has for Wicked and the musical and the books, and just, yeah, you can tell from the way he talks about it, which is so beautiful to see. And speaking of loving the project, you can see from every facet of this movie, from every department, all their hard work has gone into it, but also love, and that always makes a project so much sweeter. Obviously, we have music from Schwartz, who did the music for, obviously, the musical Wicked, and it's so beautiful to have a movie like this still have the composer alive, able to see people fall in love with it again, but also have a new audience fall in love with the music that he created, and just there's such a melancholy to his music, and so much foreshadowing, and just it really tugs the heartstrings and really talks heavily about life and just decisions that you make and how you can diverge from different paths that you could possibly have taken, which is such an interesting topic of life. Now, I will say the writing was really good because I was really worried when they said part 1, part 2. I was like, oh god, like, what are they gonna do? Like, I don't know how they're gonna work this out. Like, is it gonna work? Is it gonna be, like, too long? Is it gonna be too short? Like, how is this gonna work? But I will say, it actually, putting it in 2 parts and letting this first act really helped it breathe, because in the musical, I think when you walk away from it, it feels like it is rushed, obviously because it's a musical stage. You don't have the time that you have and the luxury that you have with, like, film or, like, other sorts of, like, art media. So to see it so well paced on screen as well, really let it breathe. You have these different scenes that obviously aren't in the musical, and these more like character driven moments as well, and it felt like you get a little bit more time with the characters, which is nice, because otherwise with the musical you're just not rushing, but you're going through the music numbers really quick. You know, act 1 and then on to act 2, and, you know, but in this one you get to breathe and you get to feel the emotions of each song and how it affects like every other song and decision after that. Now, I need to give big props to the people who did the incredible sets on this film. Now, in Hollywood nowadays, we don't have that a lot of green screen, blue screens are used nowadays with VFX, and, you know, I do feel bad for VFX artists who are forced to rush their work and it doesn't look as pristine as it did back in the day. But thankfully, with Wicked, thank the Lord, because I think a lot of people thought, including myself, in the trailer, they were like, oh yeah, let's do it in post, let's do that, la la la, that sort of like notion. But thankfully, it wasn't. Like, and even Jon Chu, the director, had to really like press that and show evidence that like, oh no, like this is all real, like the sets are real, the train is real, like majority of the Emerald City is real, Munchkin Land, like they did all the tulips, like I can't remember how many they grew, was it 900 or 9,000 tulips or something that they grew from Munchkin Land? A lot of things they built from scratch, which was so nice. It was like, this is so refreshing, this is very much like the original Wizard of Oz, and even other old productions that used to do that, where they build these massive sets and they film. It's just, I really appreciated that, and it just brought the film more together by bringing it into like these physical spaces instead of doing it with heavy CGI. Obviously there is CGI in like certain aspects of it, but the rest of it though, these sets, like beautiful and just amazing. I could talk about it all day. Now we're going to jump into the acting. I will say I'm not going to talk about all the actors, I'm just talking about the people who really had an influence on the story, especially in part 1. But if anybody wants to leave some comments and ask me about different characters that may have popped up, please do. I'm happy to answer questions or like give my comments about that. Starting off with the wonderful Wizard of Oz, played by Jeff Goldblum. So I wasn't necessarily worried about this role, because I was like, they just need to get someone who's very charismatic, who can play the role of the Wizard of Oz, and obviously Jeff Goldblum is just that. He's very charismatic. I think everybody like remembers him from like Jurassic Park and, you know, like his younger days, and he looks so handsome still to this day. So like, and he has that charisma. I don't know, there's something about him that's like so whimsical. So like, I thought he was perfect. I was like, yes, he's perfect for the role, and he was good. He didn't have a lot of screen time to work with, but like still he captures you very quickly. To everybody who understands the lore of the Wizard of Oz, and even just who knows Wicked, understand that this is a con man. His charisma is basically his high skill check, basically, and he has sort of manipulation vibes to an extent. Like, you can, I don't know, for someone who knows Wicked and even the Wizard of Oz, I get that sort of vibe from him, especially when he's acting towards Elphaba and he's like, oh, like, look at this like sandbox stuff, and, you know, oh, like behind your ear with the coin, like really fascinating her with his tricks, and then the figurine saying like, oh, I got this made for you and stuff. Like, it's sad to an extent, but also it's like, oh, like getting the ick from you, my dude. And also another part of his character is he's power hungry. There is this kindness to him, but his greed outweighs his kindness. So like, we see that especially in this film, especially at the end, when Elphaba's asking him to help him with the animals, and Elphaba comes to the realization of like what he's doing, and quickly, you know, you can see like he sort of like doesn't want to do it, but his greed outweighs his wish to help Elphaba, which is really, really sad. And I love the acting choices that he made, especially with certain facial expressions he made. You can tell like he doesn't want to do it, but at the same time it's like he outweighs what he thinks is most important, which is very selfish of him. And even like in all renditions of The Wizard of Oz, it's always been him with greed. He wants more, and for people to love him, and for people to have this perception of him. And we see that with everything, like with the mechanical head again, which was built and actually moving, which is pretty cool. And yeah, just everything about him is so like constructed, I feel, to have this sort of perception of him. And yes, he wants to help Elphaba, but he doesn't want people to realize that he doesn't have any power, and like prophecy, like man brought from the sky in a balloon, and just it's so weird, but it's also like he loves that. He loves being this like this man, sort of like almost like a messiah sort of figure to these people, and reading the Grimoire, which he can't even read, and having to get other people to read it for him. And I also feel, to an extent, leading into another character, Madame Morrible, which we'll talk about in a second, I feel like it was her idea to have the spies and to capture the animals, for them, the lesser beings in Oz, which is really sad, because, like, again, like, you can see that he doesn't want to do it, but at the same time, he outweighs his greed more than his kindness, so it's like, ugh. But I'm excited to see more of his character in the next one, and I wonder what sort of acting choices Jeff Goldblum will make for that movie, because part 2, again, is a lot more angstier, but we'll see what he does. We have Madame Morrible, played by Michelle Yeoh. Oh god, she is a goddess. I love Michelle Yeoh, and my friend Tommy, people know him on the channel, I've reacted to a couple of things with him on here. He didn't know that she was in the film, so when she popped up, he was like, oh my god, Michelle Yeoh, and yeah, she's just so magical, and just, yeah, she's so fantastic. I know a lot of people criticized her singing voice, but I personally don't know why, but I love that voice that she has. It's not very obviously Broadway, high professional singer. I thought that it was fine. It didn't need to be something over the top or absolutely like incredible. With Madame Morrible, she's a very interesting character, because by the end of the movie we realize that all along she's really been such a horrible character and person especially to the girls, and especially to Elphaba and to Glinda. With that information from the end of the film, it's very sad, especially when you sort of think back on the whole story and how she manipulated and tried to have so much control over Elphaba. Because at first you think, oh, she's so kind, like, she's giving these lessons to Elphaba, she sort of has like some empathy for her, that she wants to help her get like more powerful, and she wants to better her as a person, as a sorceress. But in reality, that's not it at all. She's trying to sort of isolate Elphaba, not letting anybody else come into her class, especially Glinda, giving her so much praise, telling her about the Wizard of Oz all the time. And I feel like if Glinda didn't give the hat to Elphaba, and also the whole thing with Nessa, I think that if Elphaba went to the Wizard of Oz by herself, it would have been easier for Madame Morrible to really brainwash her into thinking like, oh, you're the only one with this power, like, you can do this, you can help the animals, sort of thing, like, try and get into, like, take control of her and really take advantage of her because of her insecurities. And it's just so heartbreaking, because you could think about that and it's like, oh, thank god that didn't happen, because then it would be a very different Wizard of Oz and different Land of Oz sort of stuff that would have happened. This leads to her behavior towards Glinda, and it makes more sense, because at first, because Glinda is a bit of a bully towards Elphaba, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, Madame Morrible can be mean to her, like, oh, but Michelle Yeoh delivering those lines though, she was like, oh, she's so mean. But yeah, like, you can see, again, with that pressure around Elphaba, that's why she's so mean to Glinda. She's, like, putting her down, making sure that she feels, like, also, like, very put down, and almost, like, off-putting, to make sure that she doesn't get involved in anything that she does. Why? Because she wants to keep control over Elphaba and, like, make sure that nobody gets involved with that. But the only reason that she lets Glinda into the program is obviously the risk of losing Elphaba, so she has to do it. But then because of that, it definitely leads to Glinda and Elphaba getting more of a bigger friendship from that, because she let that happen. So it was a small mistake in her plan, but like, it just shows how absolutely horrible she is, Madame Morrible. She does see the effect very quickly of how much influence Glinda has over Elphaba, because of their very tight friendship. And that's why immediately when Elphaba sort of rebels against her, she immediately looks to Glinda and uses her manipulation again, and sort of says, if you want, what's the line? I wrote it down. If you want to be seen doing good, you'll get her back. And she, obviously Glinda, who cares so much about her image and cares so much about Elphaba as well, goes after Elphaba and, doesn't really hesitate. But she sees an opportunity. Same with when Elphaba leaves and Glinda's decided to stay behind. She takes advantage of Glinda's sort of emotional state, and, is really warm, loving to her, and for Glinda, that's really easy for her to fall into because she's always wanted that from Madame Morrible. So she's very easily like falling into her trap, and Madame Morrible seeing potential to take advantage of her, really. And it's so sad because it's like, oh, like Glinda is not naive, but like she should be able to see like what's going on, but unfortunately she's so encased in her mind about what people think about her that she just, you know, she doesn't care about that at the moment. And I really think that, especially if people have watched the movie and seen Defying Gravity, I think for a fact that the whole Storm segment, especially over Shiz and the Emerald City, was done by Madame Morrible because she like does her hand thing, and the storms sort of rise up against Elphaba and just, it's like, no, and making her look really evil, you know, the green electricity and clouds, like, and she always said weather was her specialty, so and again, like I said in the Wizard of Oz segment, I definitely think that it was her plan to get the spies, capture the animals, and have full control of Oz and the perception of what people have of the Emerald City and the Wizard of Oz, which is very dark. Now, Nessarose Thropp, played by Marissa Bode. So I will say this, Nessarose is not one of my favorite characters. Me and my sister agreed on this. We do not like her. I have empathy for her, but also she's a very cruel character. I think personally, people might come for me when I talk about her character because I have mixed feelings about her. I will say that her story has built up now and will definitely reach a climax in part 2. So if anybody felt like her story sort of like wavered a little bit, wait for part 2. I assure you, there's going to be a lot that happens in part 2 that'll make more sense when you see it. Nessarose, like, obviously, you feel empathy for her because of her situation, especially with what happened to her mother with the, the milk flowers? Getting her into this position where she obviously can't walk, she's in a wheelchair. But I think, and people might disagree with me on this, and please give me your opinion, I would love to hear it about Nessarose. I think she's somewhat jealous of the unwanted attention that Elphaba gets, mainly because she is known as the green girl's sister and all that stuff, so it's very much like she's ashamed of having her as a sister and doesn't really want to be associated with Elphaba. When we see her at Shiz and Elphaba really quickly apologizes, she's like, look, I shouldn't have said anything when she had her little upfront moment with Glinda, and Nessa's like, oh yeah, you shouldn't have, like, this is my moment to like restart my life and stuff. Fair enough, it probably is very strange that your sister gets picked on for being green, but also, come on now. And also just, it really cemented my idea of not liking Nessa, especially at the Ozdust Ball. About Nessa, you see how shameful she feels, or like ashamed she is of having Elphaba as a sister. Like, her sister has come more confident than she's ever felt before to a party, you know, she's sort of proud of herself, has her little hat on, and her beautiful dress. Her dress looks so cool. But like, she's dancing and Nessa's just like so embarrassed by her and saying like, oh, I can't watch this, and just looking away, and it made my heart break for Elphaba. If anything, you should be standing up for your sister, like, if you have so much love for her, because Elphaba has so much love for Nessa, but then Nessa, it doesn't feel the same, like reciprocated from Nessa, so that's why I'm like, I don't really like Nessa. And also her infatuation with Bok. Now, again, this will lead into a climax in part 2, but it's so, it's very much the ick from both Bok and Nessa. But her envy for it, like, it's very evident, especially in her last scene with the train scene, and she's watching him look at Glinda. You know, he's so infatuated by her as well, and so deeply in love with Glinda, and she's just angry, and she obviously like she leaves very quickly because she's very upset. But the acting choices and the facial expressions, and a lot of the actors in this film was so good, like the subtlety, so good, especially because you don't have a lot of time. The acting just in the face expression in the eyes, so good. So highly props to Marissa for her acting, especially in that scene. And it's sort of like shows that there's more to come, definitely, with Nessarose. One aspect that I truly love as well is the independency of her using her wheelchair on her own, because in the musical, this is very different. Elphaba is the only one to push her in the musical. I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong, someone can correct me on that. Or Bok does at the Ozdust Ball, but usually it's Elphaba. But in this, I love how both Nessa and Elphaba push for her independency. Like, she doesn't want to really rely on anybody. She wants to be independent. She wants to look after herself, which is such a beautiful thing. And I have seen people who do have accessibility issues and people who use wheelchairs really praise the movie for that. I think that's a beautiful representation as well, especially for women as well who use it. Not to put men down, but also just to see a woman in a wheelchair, and just the dance scene as well was so beautiful between her and Bok. Like, oh, just the happiness. Like, oh, I hope people got, like, really happy when they saw that scene, because that was a really lovely scene as well. As much as I don't like Nessarose, that was a really good scene. Now, moving on to Ethan Slater as Bok. Now, also like Nessarose, he has a very minor role in part 1, and we see him only a few times. It's a very small role, especially in Act 1 of the musical as well. It's very much like this. But again, his story will really come out in part 2. No spoilers at all about it, but it turns into something very, very climatic and very important for part 2 of the story. We see in this part as well, like very much like sprinkled throughout the story, his deep, probably problematic infatuation with Glinda. Sees this really beautiful exterior of Glinda that she puts on, and also this untrue kindness that she has to get what she wants, which isn't truly kindness, but he sees it as true kindness. An example of this was telling him to take Nessa to the Ozdust Ball, because in her eyes that is seen as good. Like, that is a good notion to her. And so he thinks in his mind, by doing that, oh, I will be seen as really good by her. By doing this act of kindness, it'll get me more favor with Glinda. And it's just really sad. Like, that's such a ick thing to do, to get someone's favor, taking somebody else out. And the fact that he sees that as an important part to winning her heart as well. Like, he thinks, like, if he does this, it'll give him a chance to, like, dance with her at the Ozdust Ball. Ugh. However, this changes very quickly when Fiyero kisses Glinda at the Ozdust Ball, and he dances with Nessa. But again, we quickly see his infatuation hasn't gone away, especially when Glinda does this sort of, like, act of, you know, wanting to be in solidarity with the whole situation with Dr. Dillerman, and changes her name from Galinda to Glinda, which is, again, doesn't really do anything but to the situation. But you know, he sees that as this momentous act, especially the students as well. Like, the bare minimum seen as such a massive kindness. Him seeing that, he's so infatuated by that. Like, you can see he's so mesmerized, and that infatuation hasn't gone away. But again, more in part 2. Now, I'm very excited to talk about this. Jonathan Bailey as Fiyero. Now, look, I'm a fan of Jonathan Bailey because he's been in a couple of shows that I've watched, Fellow Travelers, and also, of course, Bridgerton, and, oh, that man can swoon. But even in this, I feel like they did more for the character of Fiyero and made him a lot more kinder and softer than what he is in the musical. Not to say that he's really bad in the musical, but I feel like you can see from the get-go there's some sort of quality of kindness that's very different from what it was in the original musical. An example of this is his immediate meeting with Elphaba, and we see the way that he acts towards her, because I can't remember, because I only watched the show in June, but I'm pretty sure he acts pretty, like, not disgusted, I'm pretty sure disgusted or shocked maybe, I can't remember though, when he meets Elphaba. But in this, he's not even shocked, he's not anything, he's just like, oh yeah, you probably blended into the foliage, which is really funny. It's also this intrigue, like, it's not actually anything, like, onward, like, disgust or, like, horror, it's just, he's intrigued by her because he's never seen anyone like her, and he makes jokes to sort of alleviate the weight of the moment when he's like, oh, I ate grass as a child and I was seasick, and, you know, immediately he's just, you know, he's just teasing her, and he tries to do, like, you know, this way, I can't do it, but he does, like, the look, and I think he's intrigued as well by the fact that she doesn't fall for it. She's just like, okay, and then walks away and gets stuffed. To the people who knows about Wicked, And I think another aspect of him, especially with the Ozdust Ball, is empathy, especially when Elphaba gets emotional, because at first he says, oh, she doesn't care about what anybody thinks, but then he realizes, especially when she gets emotional, that it's not that she doesn't care, she has to not care because this is how she's always treated in a way. And so we see his empathy from that in that moment. Like, again, the facial expressions you can see from Jonathon's face, especially when playing Fiyero in that moment, you can see it falls from sort of like this sort of proudness, I think, from her being able to not care what people think, but to this sort of soft empathy, and he sort of realizes, no, she actually cares, but she's had to hide it, you know. She has this tough exterior, but it was slowly cracking in that moment. So he quickly realizes that she does have a heart. And this empathy that he has really extends as well with the lion cub scene, because we see him not a moment's hesitation, like, you know, he looks after Glinda, makes sure she's okay, and then quickly springs into action and helps Elphaba get the lion cub away. Now, this leads me very much into speaking into the relationships that he has with these two leading ladies, with Glinda and Elphaba. We'll start off with Glinda. Now, my belief with their relationship, especially with Dancing Through Life, we see it like that sort of you're perfect, we're perfect together part of the musical, is because that is what they care about. They care about their image. They look perfect as a couple, they looked perfect on the outside to everybody at Shiz and even to just society, and they both care heavily, Glinda and Fiyero, about how people perceive their image. But in reality, they don't actually have anything in common, which is why when he starts to think, Glinda's like, oh, I don't know why he's thinking, and oh, I love him even though he's not perfect anymore because he's thinking. Which is really funny from her part. But yeah, it just shows that there is more to his relationship with Elphaba. I think immediately his intrigue starts off with, I guess, obviously with not even her being green, but I think it's because she acts so normal around him. She doesn't get like all swooned and like, you know, like does the whole Glinda toss thing, or like, you know, how everybody like sort of like stops and like does everything that he says, sort of. She's the opposite. She doesn't do that. She doesn't sort of like fall for his charm in a way. She just is herself, and he likes that because it makes him feel normal. It doesn't make him feel like this fake false perception of a perfect prince that he has. It makes him feel like a normal person. And I think especially with before I'm Not That Girl, you can see that he's sort of shocked by it and like likes to feel like this normality between them, and that really starts to make him think. Talking about Elphaba, her morals and her like beliefs in animal rights, I think Fiyero definitely strongly agrees with that, because obviously he has a horse who obviously was talking in this scene, and he does care for the lion, like, again, springs to action immediately, doesn't hesitate, wants to protect the lion cub and help Elphaba with this plan. And I think it really shakes him up when she says, why are you pretending to be something that you're not? You're still putting on a fake perception of who you truly are. Why are you doing that? And he's sort of taken aback by that, because nobody's ever sort of looked at him and seen that truly that's what he's doing. I think to an extent he might have been a little bit offended and shocked because someone had done that, so that's why he wanted to walk away from that situation very quickly. But I think that again made him start to think about the perception of himself that he's put out to everybody else, like this perfect false version of himself, you know, the Dancing Through Life sort of like visage, which is like, you know, don't care about what anybody else thinks, don't care about, you know, life and stuff. But in reality he really cares, but also cares about other things more than like sort of like the razzle dazzle life. I think he appreciates that she's pushing him to think like that, because he's never really thought like that before, and like thought that, oh, maybe I am putting a false perception of myself, and actually enjoys the fact that she wants him to be authentic instead of this fake version of himself. And again, I'm saying it again, the thinking aspect, I think that makes him think of Elphaba a lot, especially before the train scene. We see like him sort of thinking about her, especially in I'm Not That Girl. We see him like constantly looking behind him, wanting to see Elphaba, almost as if he wants to see her again, almost as if he wants to feel the same thing that he felt in that moment. By the train scene, when it comes to it, it sort of feels like he enjoys her company, enjoys the way that he's able to be himself around her. And because Glinda's there, he can't really say it, but he does nod to the fact that I have thought about that day a lot, and you know, I can't stop thinking about it. And it's such a beautiful notion. Perhaps he feels like she could allow him to be himself without judgment, and he finds that really lovely, and that aspect maybe hopeful. That's why I really love the yearning as well in that scene with the train, because you can see there's so much they both want to say. And again, in the musical, you can't really see the facial expressions with those moments. It's like, depending on where you're sitting, you can't really see that. You're just seeing like sort of like the outward image of what's going on. Both Elphaba and Fiyero are both like yearning to say more, and yearning, I guess, to have more conversation with each other. It's just so good. And Jonathon did it so well. Like, you can see like he wants to say more, like he sort of like is like trying to find the words, but he can't. It's just so good. And then obviously at the end, him riding off to Oz, the Emerald City, to try and find his girls, and his story in part 2. The yearning and everything. It's gonna be so good. I cannot wait. Now, for our 2 leading ladies, we are starting with the Good Witch, Glinda, or Galinda, played by Ariana Grande Butera. Now, I won't lie. When it was first announced that Ariana Grande was playing Glinda, I was worried. Mainly because I was worried that it would be Ariana. It wouldn't be Glinda. But Ariana proved me incredibly wrong. She was absolutely hilarious. I loved her so much in this film. She reminded me a lot of Lucille Ball, and the body acting, the exaggeration of like certain actions, and her voice was just so good, and had the whole cinema laughing. It was great, and again, really surprised me, because I didn't think that it would be that good, but she shocked me with how good she was. I knew that the singing would be fine. She's a professional. She's a pop singer, pop star. It was just the acting perspective that I was like worried about, but it was perfect. And her acting choices, can I just say, about No One Mourns the Wicked. Like her facial expressions, the body language, like it was so good. And especially because of the foreshadowing. People obviously know Wicked. They will know there's a lot of foreshadowing for part 2 and a lot of the songs that happen in that part of the show. Beautiful, especially for people who obviously know the story. It was just heart-wrenching and just, like, why? And that high note she takes at the very end, so good. I will also say, major spoiler for part 2, so if you don't want to watch this, go to the next part in the timestamp. And also just in the rest of the song, like, goodness knows the wicked lives are lonely, goodness knows the wicked die alone. It feels a lot of, like, I think regret and sadness, because for certain actions that happen in part 2 for Elphaba, and also the song is very much not only talking about Elphaba, but it's actually talking about Glinda, how she feels wicked, and how she feels like she's let her friends down, and how she believes that she herself is wicked. I feel like I'm going to talk more about it in part 2, because again, I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't seen Wicked the musical, so, I'll leave that for part 2, so that'll be a very extensive review. But going to her story, the story of Glinda is very complicated, but really well done. It's so good. Mainly because she's not truly a good witch. Not to say that she's evil, but she makes questionable decisions as a witch who is supposed to be perceived as good. Basically, doing things to be nice versus doing things to be seen as nice, which is 2 very different things. Example, saying she'll fix Elphaba's skin, which is very racist, and getting intrigued immediately by the offer from the wizard to stay in the Emerald City just before Defying Gravity. Sending Bok to Nessa, as well, saying that with him doing such a good act, it will be seen as good by her. But also just that, it always makes me laugh, this moment, but the moment where she says, I'm changing my name from Galinda to Glinda, and everybody having this massive reaction to, I say bare minimum, but it isn't even the bare minimum, because she's saying that she does it in protest, but there's no real effect to it. There's so much more layering to her as a person. And, people will obviously say like, oh yes, that's all funny and all, but when you see those deeper layers to it, it's a lot more, like, not sinister, but like, there's no thought behind her actions, really. That's probably the best way to say it. Now, I will say with popular, so good. There were hints of Ariana's voice, like Ariana the pop star in there. Like when she did like a few runs, I was like, that sounds like Ariana. But the rest of it, again, like I was worried that she would just be sounding like Ariana, but she disappeared and became Glinda the Good Witch and Galinda at Shiz. Props to her, because I know a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like it's just singing, like people do this 8 times a week, like during the shows, but to take on this role was obviously a huge effort for her, and she has so much love for the character, and I love that. So she should be very proud, because she did the role justice, in my opinion. And I love that with Popular, going back to that, Glinda is a little bit crazy, like, you know, she's got so much adrenaline, she's almost like ADHD, like, just like, you know, like her rolling on the floor and like shaking and her leg going out and just, her like running down the corridor. It was so good. And that high kick, the gasp that the cinema let out when the first when I went and watched it, everybody was like, oh, like, didn't expect that. So good. And she fully embodied that craziness that comes with Glinda. So I'm so happy that she did that, because Jon Chu said this as well in his interview. He was looking for someone who wasn't afraid of their image being looked at differently, because apparently when Ariana came in for the like one of the auditions, she had like, you know, she had very much like the Ariana Grande look, and he said like, come back again, but like, you know, come back, you know, as Ariana, not Ariana Grande, like that the world knows. And she did, and she changed it, and she like was very different and took on the feedback and changed it, because he was saying like he was looking for someone who was not like willing to let that fall away, that image that the world has of them, and to become something more. And she did that. So props, Ariana. And again, going back to Popular, I love that in that moment, genuinely, like Glinda is so like taken by Elphaba's beauty, especially in the mirror scene when she's saying like, oh, you're beautiful, Elphaba, and like, oh, like Elphaba has tears in her eyes. Oh, it's so beautiful. But it's not because she made her beautiful, because in the Song of Popular, she's bragging about her popularity, obviously, and her beauty. But in this, it's very much like true like beauty. She sees an Elphaba because all that loathing has gone away. Now, this is just a hint of spoilery for part 2, so please be aware. But I will say, I love the inclusion of her in the Lion Club scene. Lion classroom scene. Now, in the musical, this wasn't it. Glinda was just not there. She was probably in a different class or something. And it makes the story so much more tragic, because it shows that even though they were on good terms, and, you know, they were on, you know, all Fiyero, Glinda, and Elphaba were friends now, it shows that Elphaba didn't truly trust Glinda still, because, you know, she doesn't let Fiyero sleep, but she lets the rest of the classroom sleep, and there was that mistrust, like, that she has for Glinda and her actions and the way that, you know, she does certain things and sort of makes certain actions, but those seeds of mistrust and doubt will grow into something worse in part 2, especially with certain decisions, if people get what I'm talking about, the ending of the movie or the ending of the musical. And yeah, it's so heartbreaking, and just, it does plant the seeds of mistrust and like just doubt in Glinda for Elphaba, and it will grow into something much more in part 2. Now, another part I wanted to talk about Glinda is an insecurity that she has, which was heavily, I think, insinuated in the film. I might be wrong, people can like correct me on this, but her insecurity of how she is perceived by other people, because from the get-go she really cares about how people see her, who she talks to, how she talks, how she dances, how she dresses. She wants to be a sorceress really bad, and she really wants to be in Morrible's class, but immediately she's sort of put down by the fact that she wasn't chosen, but instead she's inconvenienced by Elphaba because she didn't get that opportunity. I think the moment she does change, and even though she still cares about her image after this is the moment where she has sort of a small moment of clarity, which is the Oz Dust Ball. Now, there's a lot leading into this, so let me just get into it. Her giving the hat to Elphaba, like, she obviously did that as a joke. She invited Elphaba, and, you know, for Elphaba that was seen as a massive notion of kindness, which I'll get into more when talking about Elphaba. But for Glinda, she didn't realize it was that big of a deal, because when Morrible comes to her and tells her she's been put in the class, Elphaba's asked for her to be involved, she realizes what she's done and probably the mistake that she's made by giving her the hat and asking her to come, because she was basically asking her as a joke to come to the ball, probably not realizing that Elphaba would come, and if she did, she probably knew that she would be made fun of. And then in the moment of seeing Elphaba in this moment of, just emotion and just pain, you can see that there is empathy that she has for Elphaba, which is the first time we've really seen it from Glinda. And I love in this one, because in the musical they don't do this, but in the film, there's those two students, I can't remember their names, but they come up to her and they're like, what are you doing? Why are you dancing with her? And immediately she becomes momentarily insecure, I think, because she's looking around at people, how people are laughing at her as well for doing the dance. And then in that moment, she's like, no, in a way, putting everything on the line for herself, her image, the respect that she's had, her reputation, and the way she looks to other people. But in that moment, she doesn't care. She's there for Elphaba. And I think that's so beautiful. She sticks with it. She shows her solidarity with Elphaba, bless her heart, and, is comforting her in this really emotional moment. And as beautiful as the scene is, it's so tragic as well, because only when Glinda gets involved and starts dancing does everybody else, including Nessa. And it's just, really? Like, none of you have the heart to stand up for Elphaba? It's just so sad. It makes me so upset, but also really, really sad. And this insecurity, I will say, does lead, I think, personally, into her decision of why she doesn't go with Elphaba in Defying Gravity. But we are going to discuss Defying Gravity at the end, because that needs a whole section on its own. Now, Cynthia Erivo as Elphaba Thropp. Now let me talk about my story about Wicked and how I got it. When early 2000s, a long time ago, I remember seeing the trailer for Wicked on TV and always wanting to go. At the time, my parents said, no, you're not old enough, because I was very young. Probably can't go at this stage, also because it was very expensive to go to musicals. They said, no, probably when you're older we'll take you. So, what I did was I researched everything about Wicked. I looked up the soundtrack, absolutely fell in love with it. I cried to Defying Gravity for the first time ever hearing it. And then it came back in 2014, and I had saved so much money by that time that I was like, I need to go. And I dragged my sister Whitney to go and see it. I spent $400 of my money on 2 tickets. And we went and saw Gemma Ricks, I remember forever, as Elphaba. And it changed my life. Seeing her, I was crying during Defying Gravity. And it was a dream come true, because I'd been waiting for so long to see it on stage. And it was something that I needed, I think, because I really, really, really connected with Elphaba at the time. I'm not going to get into it too deep, but I was going through depression, really hard time, and just Elphaba was someone who I saw myself in so strongly. And seeing Elphaba on stage, Defying Gravity, just, was so emotional for me. And I've seen it twice this year as well, when it came to Australia again. But also I take credit, because I got my sister to fall in love with Wicked, and that's why she loves it now. But, going back to Cynthia, I have been a massive fan of Cynthia for years. I've followed her on Broadway, and I love her stuff. She's so angelic. Like, really, she is like from another planet. Being able to see her as Elphaba, and I might be wrong, people can correct me on this, because I haven't seen other women of color play Elphaba. Having her play Elphaba, I think, is completely different, and it feels different, and I think that's why with watching, I'm getting emotional right now, but like watching her play Elphaba, Defying Gravity, Wizard and I, all those songs, it just, there was so much more to it, and it just made it so much more emotional. And yeah, she just destroyed all my expectations. She was absolutely amazing. Her acting was just so brilliant and just so well done. And I like the changes that, I'm not sure if it's something that she did or if it was in the writing or if Jon decided to do it, but I love the change in Elphaba from being blunt and angry to instead being sort of not acceptive, but more like ready to deal with the way that people sort of like approached her. I understand that obviously in the musical it's very different. She's angry, which is understandable, totally understandable, but I don't know, there's something about her sort of being accustomed to it and sort of ready for people to react to her and such. Like, it's so sad and more heartbreaking, and the subtlety of her acting as well, especially when Glinda says, oh, she'll fix her. Her expression in that, God, her acting was just perfection. Now, Wizard and I had to talk about this song because it felt different from any other time I've heard Wizard and I. It felt like there was this childlike giddiness to Cynthia, which I don't think I've ever heard from her in other songs, because a lot of the other songs that she does sing is very emotional. But hearing this giddiness and this, you can hear the smile in her voice, which is so beautiful. And I always love that with singing. Like, you can hear the smile. It was just so, and I was smiling during that scene twice, watching it twice. It's just so addictive because you just see this joy in her that I feel like she never had before. So it's just, oh, so beautiful. And it's almost like during Wizard and I, she's holding her voice back a lot. And then at the end, she doesn't belt to the extent that she does in Defying Gravity, but she belts a lot. I love that last part. But even the whole song, because usually with Wizard and I, like if it's on my playlist, I'll be like, yeah, skip. But with her, and I think the rendition that they built it with, like with this orchestra and stuff, there's just so much power in it. And it's just like, oh, gotta listen to the whole song to get that oomph to it. And then also the lyrics about, like, there'll be a celebration and all of ours, everything to do with me. Yeah, it's just why? Oh, why do you do this? Another aspect I really love is how much fun she finds Glinda's abrasiveness to her, like especially like with What Is This Feeling. I love that song, especially because Glinda is so like affected by her being there, and Elphaba's just sitting there like, I don't really care, and Glinda's more like on the other side with all the students singing, and Elphaba's just like, yeah, whatever, like she's used to it, sadly. And I think this is an example of what I brought up with Glinda's like part of talking about her, was doing things to be nice versus doing things to appear nice. Now with Elphaba and the whole thing about Bok and Nessa, so obviously she wanted to do something nice for Ariana, for Glinda, for, you know, saying thank you to her about what happened. But then when she's given the invitation and given the hat, she sees that because obviously no one's ever done something like this before her or said something like this to her, she sees this as an immense kindness, like an invitation to a ball, and this hat that she really likes and thinks it's really cute. And she thinks this is a huge act of kindness and goes to Madame Morrible and do an act of kindness, not to appear nice, but to be nice to Glinda, and ask her to be involved in the Sorceress program. Now, the Oz Dost Ball, oh, it was such an emotional moment, I will say this, because the build-up to it, with her walking in, having a moment, fixing her hat, and that smile is just, oh. I hope I don't get emotional talking about this, because this scene just... But yeah, seeing her walk in and be so excited and then quickly evaporate when people look at her and the music stops, it's just so heartbreaking. And I think it hit me a lot because it was so painful as well for me, because I really think that it broke something in me but also healed something in me, because it reminded me so much of my time, especially in high school as well. I didn't have any friends, and I would be on my own, like hanging out in the library and stuff, listening to these songs, Wicked, and just, you know, it definitely, yeah, again, it broke something and it healed something in me. And Cynthia, just the acting in that scene, props to her, like, it was so beautiful, because no words spoken, just face, movement, and then when she's dancing with Glinda and she turns and you just see the tears, it's just, it was a lot, but it was beautiful. And sort of going back to Glinda, it was Glinda's first act of kindness, because again, she felt empathy for Elphaba, felt like this was her fault, and danced with her. And it's just so beautiful that, you know, she's there in that moment supporting Elphaba, because nobody's done that for her. And it's just so lovely and heartbreaking, like her sort of wiping her tears away, saying, it's okay. Like, So heartbreaking, but so beautiful. Now, briefly talking about the Elphaba and Fiyero relationship, because we obviously spoke about it earlier, but I do love I'm Not That Girl. That's one of my favorite songs. And I love her rendition of it, like the little like runs she does. Oh, so good, perfection. And I love the yearning and like the pain in the music as well, because you sort of hear the hope in the beginning, and then in the last part of the song you sort of hear the pain and the longing and the yearning in her voice, not only for love but even I think for friendship from Fiyero, because she sort of hasn't had that before, I think, with anybody else. That yearning at the train station again, both of them, like, oh, it was so, oh, it was like, why you do this? But yeah, it was so good, and I can't wait to see more in part 2. Now, the visit to the Emerald City. Woof, let's get into it. Hello, Editor Shiming here, really quickly coming in because I completely forgot to include something in my review. But very quickly, I wanted to show off my new t-shirt that actually arrived today. Oh, it's so cool. Perfect timing while I'm editing my review and I had to film some extra content. Idina and I think it's Kirsten or Kristen, I apologize, I always get her name wrong, but being involved in One Short Day was brilliant, and I love the way that they did it, that it wasn't so shoehorned in. It was like perfect and it made sense, like, you know, these two like women who are dressed sort of like witches or like almost like godmothers in a way. Beautifully done, and hearing them sing again is so good. And yeah, just having that notion of them in there is so important, because they were the first ladies who brought Wicked to the stage, and we obviously have to respect the craft, and it must be so incredible for them as well to, you know, be able to see this happening in real life, because a lot of artists with adaptations like these, a lot of the people who are originally in the stages or even in just music and other sort of genres of media unfortunately pass away before these things can become a reality. So it's beautiful that they were alive and we're actually able to see it. Something I mentioned earlier in the video. That was just a quick note from me. Continue watching the video. So I will say I absolutely love one part of it, which is when the wizard tells her like, oh, I can grant you anything your heart's desire, and she looks at the figure that he's given her of herself. And you can see, like, she looks at it, and she looks at the green paint, and then she smiles, and she does this over and over again in the story of Wicked. She puts her morals and her love for others and her own beliefs in front of herself and her own wishes. And I believe, I mean, I might be wrong, but I felt like maybe there was a little bit of inside her that she did love herself a little bit, like, you know, loving the greenness of herself. I think maybe I'm wrong about that, but I also think that it definitely has to do with her wanting to do good, and instead of getting her wish granted for her to be de-greenified, it was like, Elphaba, I love you. The acting from Cynthia, especially in those last 20 minutes in the Emerald City, and from her horror, from reading the Grimoire, seeing the flying monkeys, and unfortunately what she did by reading the Grimoire, again, the realization and the sadness and disappointment of the wizard not actually being the great Wizard of Oz that she always thought that he was. He's just a con man who puts on a show. Now, Defying Gravity. This song has meant so much. Now, I've seen 3 shows of Wicked, and all 3 times they were amazing on stage. But Cynthia, the power in her voice and the build in the song as well. Props to the music team as well, because really letting the song breathe, I think, changed it and oomphed it so much. In this, free reign, she finally lets it go and just goes full force. And her war cry, I know a lot of people were like, oh my god, it sounds terrible. I absolutely loved her war cry from the get-go. Just people didn't understand it, but I loved it, because I was like, you can feel that energy and that build-up just release. And obviously I think it was also because we didn't hear the full song and the build to that big war cry, but having that, like, the changes that she made, the moments where she sort of let the song pause and then she continued singing, like, so good. And Cynthia did so much justice to it, and I died when the image of her and the cape flowing behind her as a little nod towards the musical in the cherry picker moment. Oh, it was just so good. And just seeing it like that too, like the billowing of the cape and the storm behind her was just, oh. And also, this is where I actually broke down when I first went and saw it, like just ugly crying, was when she's falling. She does the big jump and then she falls, and she sees her younger self and she reaches out to them and then flies back up. Oh, and then just, yeah. And then also I love how we actually see her flying, like with the monkeys behind her, and she's singing like, I'm flying high, and it's just like, oh my god, like why? It's so perfect. And just, yeah, that song will forever be written into my brain. It was just so good. Now, we're not going to take too long on this, but the decision in Defying Gravity for both our ladies. Now, I will say this. I think a lot of people give a lot of hate towards Glinda, but people need to understand that she's a complicated character as much as Elphaba is and other people in the musical are. It's a very selfish act from both our ladies. Not from one or the other, from both. Audiences in the musical in terms of that, and I'm not sure about movie audiences yet, but with Elphaba, she's praised for walking away from it all, from choosing good, but then Glinda is heavily hated and put down because she decided to stay behind. And again, both of them were selfish in terms of asking that question to stay and to go, because asking Glinda to give up her whole life, what she's known, again, the whole popular aspect, her image is very important to her, so she will be ostracized to the extent that Elphaba has. Elphaba is used to that. Glinda isn't. Glinda is used to being known as popular. She's seen for a reputation. She's beautiful. And, she doesn't understand that the way that Elphaba does. Like, in terms of leaving everything behind. Again, that idea of Glinda being really ingrained with the idea of caring about what other people think. So in that moment, she thinks about that, and she can't let that go. And Elphaba quickly understands that when when Glinda goes and gets the cape, puts it around her, that is her final decision. Elphaba sort of realizes that, and she's crying. She realizes that because Glinda's not used to that. Elphaba is, and that's why it's easy for her to let it go and defy gravity and leave it all behind. I think people need to understand that there's a lot more complicated themes to the story instead of it just being easy. And, as much, and this broke my heart, but my mum turned to me and in the movie when, it finished, she was like, why didn't Glinda go with her? Is that the end of the story? Because she didn't realize there was a part 2. She was like, why didn't she go with her? Why did she go with her? Crying, bless her heart. And I was like, she couldn't walk away from it all. It's just sad. It's really sad because, of course, you want these two ladies to walk away from it. But unfortunately, Glinda can't. And again, she's not used to the same things that Elphaba is, so she never would have been able to walk away. And I don't think we should give Glinda the hate for it because, it's a very selfish act. And if people were put in her shoes, people would also choose what she did. But I think another bit, and this is major spoilers, so I'll probably skip this part. I'll give it a few seconds. Now the line, I really hope you get it and you don't live to regret it. Now, I think it's so tragic because Galinda deeply regrets it, I think. Her choice to stay in the Emerald City and with the Wizard of Oz. Elphaba, no, because she was proud of the path that she chose. However, it leads to some stuff that happens in part 2, which I won't mention, but she couldn't regret it because she was so deep into that path, really, and it's just very heartbreaking for that. That specific moment where they say goodbye and she goes off, defies gravity and goes into the sunset is the moment when their paths converge and just they can never come back the way that they were before. And that's why I didn't mention this before, but For Good, the song, people who probably don't know that won't understand this, but sprinkled throughout part 1, it was smart, but also heartbreaking because I heard it in No More Mourns The Wicked at the Oz Dust Bowl, and you hear it momentarily during Defying Gravity in the musical sort of part. It's just why would you do that? And it's just unfortunate because as much as you want these ladies to be together, it's a very tragic story because they don't get that, especially in part 1. So Ugh. It's just such a tragic story, but I love it so much. Now, of course, it's time for the rating part, and y'all are gonna hate me probably for this, but I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. Because I absolutely love Wicked, and this blew all expectations out for me, and I absolutely loved it. The only thing I didn't like it was because it ended, and I wanted part 2 immediately. Give them all the awards. I hope they get nominated. Ari deserves it. Cynthia deserves it. I'm not sure if musical because it has to be original music thing, but that'll be probably part 2 because part 2 has been rumored to have 2 new songs. But give it for costume and set design and cinematography because it was beautiful. Well, yeah, that was my review on Wicked Part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please remember to leave your comments below if you wish to, and let me know your thoughts on Wicked Part 1. It was so good. I loved it. I'll probably go and see it again or wait till it comes out because it's just so beautiful. But again, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Here's the Bingo out.